later, but as of right now, he's not here, and we'll proceed ahead. So, with that, and hope everybody had a great fall weekend. I guess you just can't beat these fall weekends, can you? So, loved it, enjoyed it.
I know it's summer today.
Okay, first off, can I have a approval of the
Difficult time.
an approval of the agenda, please?
So moved.
Motion by Chad Tuttle.
Support.
Support from Dawn Sneeden. Any questions, comments, clarifications on the agenda? Okay, hearing none, all in favor of approving the agenda, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Next, we have recognition of visitors and hearing of people present. So this is the time when those who have registered on the district website may make comments to the board this evening. Robin Vandenberg, right down here in front, will call the first couple of names out. We've got a number of items to cover on the agenda this evening, so we'll kind of keep the comments moving. So Robin, please, if you could call our first couple of speakers up.
Sure. First, we have Erin Mole, and after her, Jeanette Scheidemann.
Erin or Mole or Jeanette Scheidemann.
We have Jeanette.
I'm here. I don't know if Erin is.
Erin did indicate she might not want to speak, so we'll start with
We'll
Jeanette.
start with Jeanette. And then after Jeanette.
After that, we have Carol Phelps.
Okay.
All right. Okay. I want to start out first by saying thank you to Barb Hooper and Mark Davis for their vote to discuss the DEIB training in open session in the August meeting. Thank you very much. It is much appreciated. And I'm asking the board to work towards more transparency. Parents have entrusted Hudsonville Public Schools with their most precious treasures, their children. It's not a decision that I took lightly, and I doubt that anyone else did either. In light of the trust given to you, the least you could provide is open and honest communication with the parents and the community. There's work to be done here. I don't know if you're aware of the Ottawa County Youth Assessment Survey, which asks graphic sexual questions of our children. I know I wasn't. Nor did I think that I would be had Ottawa Impact not brought it to my attention. Due to what was undoubtedly massive parent outcry, the school has changed its policy on the survey. My question is, was the school going to inform the parents? And if so, was it going to be on the last page of the Appleseed? So my request, my plea, is please work to restore the lost trust that the parents have, the community has, and be transparent in everything that you do, both the board and the administrators. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next, Robin.
Carol Phelps.
And then Kate Ritzma.
Carol Phelps and Kate Whitson.
Agenda, Grinding America Down. If anyone here has seen this film, you know the evil that is hidden behind the scenes in our schools and government. This film proves that we are being transformed into a socialist society where a handful of elites have everything and everyone else at the bottom has nothing. CRT, masks, vaccines, and the fear and division it's causing is just part of the big plan. Our Constitution was founded on the Bible, and our government has slowly pushed biblical values out so that we will honor our government rather than our God. If you don't believe me, here are just a few of our government's goals mentioned in this film. Number 1, eliminate prayer in the schools on the grounds that it violates the principle of separation of church and state. 2, discredit the family as an institution. Encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. 3, get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism. Soften the curriculum. Get control of teacher associations. Number 4, eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech and free press. 5, break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography in books, magazines, motion pictures, and TV. 6, present homosexuality degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. 7, infiltrate the press, gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion pictures. And 8, infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion. Discredit the Bible. School board, I ask you, is this what you want for your children and grandchildren? We should all be on one side, fighting together to keep our freedom. Please help us fight this battle. With the rest of my time, I would like to pray for our country and everyone here. Dear Lord, today I come to you with a prayer of protection and peace for all the families here and in every school around our country. I ask you to give them courage and wisdom as they fight for their children's safety, health, and education. I ask you to comfort the families of children who have had thoughts or action of suicide due to all the forced mandates by our governor, CDC, health department, and schools. I pray for the teachers who are being forced and coerced into teaching evil ideologies and harmful mandates. Give them courage to stand up and do what's right. Lead them away from teaching CRT and the hatred and evil that puts into our children's minds and hearts. Lord, I pray for the school board here tonight. Soften their hearts, show them the love of Jesus, and strengthen them to do what is best for the children in this school. Give them wisdom and discernment, Lord, and lead them in the direction of your will. Lord, I pray for our awesome country. Expose the evil that is running rampant in our government and reveal the truth to us all. Guide and strengthen us in this fight of good versus evil. We praise you and thank you for hearing our prayer tonight. In Jesus' name, amen.
We have Kate Ritzma and then Thomas O'Brien.
Okay, I'm going to read out part of an email that was sent out to HPS family members on September 24th. As you may be aware, there is a nationwide shortage of bus drivers. Our district has been dealing with the shortage in a number of creative ways, and our transportation department has been coming up with the innovative solutions daily, sometimes hourly, to make do with the severe shortage. Do you mean innovative solutions as in driving around in the mornings and afternoons and pulling 3 bus drivers when they arrived at their school to drop the kids off because they weren't wearing a face mask, or greeting one at the bus barn before starting their route? Innovative solutions as in having the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources and Finances escort them back to the bus barn while the Transportation Supervisor drives the bus back and then telling them you'll be in touch. You also have lost 4 other drivers due to consolidating routes. Now I'm assuming, I don't know if this is sure, so don't quote me on this, that you caught wind of the National Pull Your Kids Out Day in protest of the masks, and you randomly decided to count students without explanation to the drivers. Regardless of if you knew that or not, because of the lower number of students that day, you decided to use that count to then consolidate your routes, thus now having overcrowded buses. Coincidence? I think not. From a friend who wishes to remain anonymous, there is no standing up for employees. They are just looking for you to screw up so they can fire you. It is no longer a fun job. The only reason I stay is for the little kids that I love and the relationships I have made with their parents. These bus drivers aren't doing this for the money. They are doing this because they love our children. They are the first people that they see as they begin their school day. You have even gone so far as telling these drivers you let go that they aren't allowed to say goodbye to their kiddos with whom they've safely driven to and from school, some for 20 plus years. This doesn't sit well with me. Aren't we supposed to be sharing our emotions with each other? Isn't that what HPS is all about these days? Learning through SEL and Ruler, I'll save that discussion for the next meeting, to express our thoughts. So why can't a bus driver who has been dedicated to our students for years be able to say, hey kiddos, I won't be your bus driver any longer? Since the start of school, nearly every day we have needed our 2 mechanics, both dispatchers, and our director to drive buses in the morning and afternoon. How about you stop reprimanding drivers or consolidating routes and you wouldn't have an issue? Please don't ask me to drive my children to and from school to help lessen the load. You wouldn't be in this situation if you weren't enforcing a mandate that isn't even tied to school buses. It's a mandate for public transportation. Like I've been told, it's not like I could stand on a corner and hop on a school bus because it's not public. So what is it? And to close out, you asked for the public to refer potential drivers to you that would be willing to fill in those gaps. I have 8 driver names I am willing to send to you, the 8 that you decided to punish for no good reason, which put you in the national bus driver shortage predicament that you're in now.
Thank you for your comments. Ms. Roberts?
We have Thomas O'Brien, and after that, Gwen Snowy.
Hi, everybody. I'd like to actually give this book to you guys. This book is called This Book is Anti-Racist. It was used at Baldwin Street Middle School, and you guys can peruse it. Recently, my name's Tom O'Brien, by the way. Recently, I checked the website of AASA, or the National Superintendents Association. It gives us an idea as to where our public schools are heading. There was an ad that said AASA to host the 7th Urban Superintendents Academy Conference. Featured speaker for the event, entitled Leadership, Equity, Accountability, and Disruption, included Nicole Hannah-Jones, Pulitzer Prize-winning author. Now, Nicole Hannah-Jones won the Pulitzer for penning the 1619 Project, essays that call out our founding fathers as racist and say that our founding documents were written with the intent of maintaining a slave state. She says white supremacy culture reigns supreme in the U.S. It is obvious to us that our district has been exploring that path laid out by Nicole Hannah-Jones. Hannah-Jones' view of white people is evident, noticing several quotes from a letter she wrote to Notre Dame's newspaper, The Observer. Quote, "The white race is the biggest murderer, rapist, pillager, and thief of the modern world." Quote, "The whites' lasting monument was the destruction and enslavement of 2 races of people." Quote, "The descendants of these white devils pumped drugs and guns into the black community, packed black people into the squalor of segregated urban ghettos, and continue to be bloodsuckers in our communities. This type of extreme ideology is driving the narrative in public education today and has been supported by the teachers' unions and most academic organizations. For decades, our colleges and universities have been poisoning the minds of future teachers and young adults with the evil ideology of white supremacy culture, anti-Christian rhetoric, perpetual victimhood, and the subtle racism of low expectations. It has finally made its way into our schools. This ideology says that the marginalized are casualties of a systemically racist country that can be traced back to the white devils that wrote the racist words found in the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. This poison has created a mindset of victim versus oppressor and has sown astronomical division. I implore educational leaders and board members to rebuke this toxic and divisive message of victimhood and unite our school communities around the common goals of strong academic and behavioral expectations, powerful art and athletic programming, and the wholesome characteristics of helping others and loving our neighbors, while at the same time encouraging a spirit of thankfulness for living in a free country. Amen. We are losing the sense of community that has always been Hudsonville's most powerful characteristic. Political activism has divided us. Will our leaders choose a path of neutrality to help heal our district? Here's what we request. Number 1, open and constructive dialogue between the superintendent, board, and the community in the form of town hall discussions. Not doing this out of fear of heated discourse is a cop-out. We are not violent bigots, but concerned parents. 2, transparency moving forward. We still have no idea on the plans that have been formulated.
Ryan, please, 3 minutes is up, please.
Oh man, I'm on the roll though. Can I have one more thing?
Thank you for your comments.
One more. An apology from Dr. Vanderjack that we feel would move mountains. Many questionable things have happened in our district. Huge dollars were spent without community or school board knowledge. It was wrong, even if the motives were pure, and an apology to our community is in order. It is time to heal our district. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien.
Ryan
I
Decker.
couldn't hear because of the applause.
Gwen Snowy, and after that, Keith Ryan Decker.
I would ask folks, I know these are passionate topics, I would ask that you please refrain from applause out of respect for people's time and viewpoints, please. So, yes, next speaker.
Yes, I'm Gwen Snowy. I was at the band competition in Rockford on Saturday evening. It was beautiful and wonderful. On a positive note. So thank you for that. I keep wondering what happened, to Hudsonville schools. And that brought me to the difference between education and indoctrination. And that's what I'd like to speak on tonight. Education is fact-based, usually not controversial. We've gone back and forth between phonics and the whole language approach in the teaching of reading. But even then, both are key to learning how to read. Sometimes things change, like when it was proven that the earth was flat. There was a big change. But mostly education is facts. Indoctrination is expecting a person or a group to accept a set of beliefs that are based on opinions or conjecture. It reminds me of my older brothers, I have 4 brothers, who occasionally would take my arm behind my back and demand that I say uncle. Say uncle! Only today it's the school who's participating in the arm twisting by demanding that we say, I'm a racist. I admit I'm a racist. Or by virtue of the fact that the girls today are in the boys' restrooms and our arms twisted behind our back, that we would say, girls can turn into boys. You're right, girls can turn into boys. I also think the board and the staff are being indoctrinated by being charged with Hudsonville being so ineffective, so racist, so abusive, so out of control and indecent to humankind that we may need to make a marked systemic change. We need to break it all down and overhaul it. We've always been the exemplary school system. And now we had a young lady here a couple months ago who was saying she can't believe what Hudsonville turned into since she graduated in 2019. Now we have good families who are withdrawing their children because of what their children are being exposed to and the force that's being applied, that everybody conform to the doctrine, the new doctrine. I just wanted to remind you that children and board members and teachers are not required to leave the religion at the schoolhouse door. We are totally allowed to be Christians in the public school. The teachers are not allowed to share their religion, but the children are free to be who they are, to believe what they believe, and the parents are free to hold their values. I'm sorry. Okay. I once again ask, please just deal with specific problems with specific solutions.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you. Next, Robin, we have
Keith Flanagan.
Last Monday, I suggested to the board that you need to take a leading role in setting the guiding principles for any future diversity initiatives. I said that because it is very clear what avenue the current school administration would lead us down again. I do not trust the administration to change its approach. Another district parent and taxpayer last week said that a single lie can quickly damage trust. Yet you are not defined by what you do once. We are all human and make mistakes. You are, however, defined by how your actions in whole can be characterized. So let us review the actions that the current administration, led by Dr. Vanderjack at the helm, has taken with DEIB as a whole. Superintendent worked diligently behind the scenes with select parents, activists, and administrators to craft a vision for how they wanted to change the community. The superintendent personally and directly misled parents who specifically asked to be part of crafting any DEIB initiative, while allowing members of Voices of Hudsonville and others pushing the same agenda to join the committee. The superintendent created a lie that this effort was integrated into the 5-year plan in response to the community questionnaire. He did everything in his power to obfuscate the financial payments we were making to Julian Newman. The superintendent, along with Amy Taylor and Mandy Thomas, played convoluted word games to distance DEIB from critical race theory. They may not have been teaching critical race theory, but all three were absolutely working to implement the beliefs of critical race theory into our district. When one of the multiple FOI requests parents had to resort to in order to get to the truth finally demonstrated the lies that we were being told about the community questionnaire, the superintendent changed the story. Now, supposedly, kids were telling him they were being harassed every day in school. So if you believe his statements, then he has subsequently utterly failed to take action to protect those kids and hold responsible the kids for doing the bullying. When inappropriate books were found being assigned in middle school classes, he apologized that our vetting policy was not being followed. The books would be removed from class. Only we find out that it was a stated goal of his DEIB committee to have all teachers assigning the progressive-oriented books, not just some. And now we hear that there never was a vetting policy and that our trusted administration would be creating a new policy to ensure proper vetting of books. Apparently, the superintendent even lied to you as a board. stating that there was no content of the DEIB training able to be shown to you prior to teaching all of our teaching staff. So the bond of trust is not broken because of a single lie, but because of a constant, consistent, dedicated pattern of behavior. This administration has sacrificed their integrity in pursuit of this ideology. So why would they abandon their ideology now? I ask the board, how can this administration be led by Dr. Vanderjack be trusted? How can they be in a position to discipline teachers or students for lying? How much of their job function requires trust of the board and the community?
Thank you for your comments. And Robin?
Aaron Moody.
Aaron Newby?
Greetings, board members, administrators. Good to see y'all again. Aaron Doobie, 3175 Hudsonville, moderator, youth director, Ottawa Area Center for Pride, all that good stuff that y'all know. I wanted to let y'all know, if you missed the news, Friday, just this past Friday, the CDC released 3 different studies that showed that schools that implemented a mask mandate were 3.5 times less likely to have an outbreak than schools that did not. So I want to thank you that County did it. So thank you for the adult manner in which you have kept our children safe. There's been lots of craziness all around this. So thank you for discussing it and following the orders and keeping our kids safe. One thing I wanted to quickly touch on is there's been talk of this idea of colorblind and how we should treat everything as colorblind when it comes to race relations. And we all know the phrase, I don't see color. If you are at all familiar with any sort of civil work, you won't be surprised to find out that that came about as a response to the civil rights. So people started saying things like, I should be able to vote, and I should be able to do this, that, and the other thing that my neighbor can do. I should be able to live with next door to someone who is a different skin color than me. And their response was, well, this law doesn't say specifically your race. So we can just say, I'm going to be colorblind and ignore the problem. We see this a lot with things that very specifically impact people of minority groups. So you can see, okay, well, this law doesn't expressly say this minority group or that minority group. It just says this group in general can't do, or anyone in general can't do that. But when you look at the impact of the laws, that's where you can see the racial discrimination come in, or the transphobia, bigotry, all that stuff. It's one thing to say, okay, I don't see color, but that leads us down the road of not seeing the results. You can't ignore a problem hoping to fix it. Very specifically, I'm talking way slower than I practiced, so there was a study done in 2011 where they had school children, so very specific to education. They were told a story about one teacher that was colorblind and one that was color conscious. They then played them different examples and things that could happen out on a playground. And it's crazy, the kids that were color conscious were able to accept that.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you for your comment.
I'll send you all the study, talk way too slow.
Robin, was that everybody that we had? Okay. All right, again, thank you everyone for your comments. We move on to discussion items now. Next up, we have the social emotional learning presentation, and we're going to move things around. Bear with us for just a moment so we can all view screens correctly. So. Yeah, thank you everyone for your patience. As again, we made some adjustments here. Again, it's a work session, and we in work sessions we typically have dialogue with amongst the board and with staff, administrative team members, and so that's kind of how we had to rearrange things to facilitate that dialogue. At the same time, the information that we will be reviewing and seeing, you'll see on the screen to the right here as well. So with that, I think we're turning it over to Ross. Amy, you teeing this up? Okay, Ross. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having us out here today to talk about a new initiative in the district. My name is Ross Feldier, and I'm a PBIS specialist, and this is Heather Stauffer, who is another PBIS specialist. We've entitled our presentation Supporting the Whole Child because when we think of today's educational climate, we know that we have students coming to us from a variety of situations, many of situations that we've never experienced growing up. And kids are coming to us with needs that we've never experienced either. And so we feel like it's our duty as educators to meet the needs of all of our students so that they can achieve academic and social skills to be successful in life. So when we think of supporting the whole child through social emotional learning, this is going to be kind of our agenda for tonight. So first of all, we're going to talk about what is the definition of SEL, and SEL is an acronym for social emotional learning. What is the purpose? What are we trying to accomplish with this work in the district? Alignment, so how does this align to previous work that we've already done in the past few years? And game plan, what is the plan for this pilot implementation of this initiative this year? So first of all, we're going to talk about the definition. What is social emotional learning? So what is social emotional learning? Social emotional learning is an integral part of education and human development. SEL is the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. And if we think of students that we want to raise in our schools and raise for our Hudsonville, like aren't these skills that we just want our kids to be able to obtain, right? To have, to be able to set personal goals, to have healthy identities, to be able to feel and show empathy. These are foundational skills that we feel like our students need here in Hudsonville. And a lot of our work is based off of CASEL, which stands for, it's the Collaborative for Academics and Social Emotional Learning. And it is a resource that is used by schools, but not only schools, organizations and businesses across the country. It provides frameworks and it provides resources for schools and organizations also. The Michigan Department of Education has actually adopted these 5 competencies as their framework for the schools in Michigan are trying to come up with social emotional frameworks and tools and things. This is their competencies. And as we're thinking of like what these are, these can be related to like academic standards. So we know that we have academic standards in math and social studies and reading. They have 5 competencies that are fundamental to social emotional learning. So number 1 is self-management. Number 2 is self-awareness. Number 3 is responsible decision-making. Number 4 is relationship skills. Number 5 is social awareness. And then within that, it gives like what that looks like in the classrooms. And these are just examples. So first of all, self-management might look like identifying and using stress management strategies. Self-awareness might look like recognizing and labeling emotions. Responsible decision-making might look like demonstrating academic behaviors. Relationship skills, paying attention to others when they are speaking. It's a pretty important one, right? Social awareness, recognize that words and actions can hurt others. So I've given you some examples of what social emotional learning is. These are some things that social emotional learning is not. First of all, it's nothing new. I can say as an educator that's taught for over 15 years that I have always been teaching my skills related to social emotional learning, right? How to be kind to each other, how to be empathetic, how to hear someone else's viewpoint, how to handle conflict appropriately, right? The thing I never liked that I never had as an educator was any training or any tools or any resources to help me as a teacher in the classroom. I was always finding stuff off Teachers Pay Teachers or talking to my colleagues or finding stuff on Google for hours of how to deal with these issues. But in the sense of what social emotional learning is, this is nothing new that we've done as educators, right? We've always done things like this. It's not therapy or counseling. Okay, we are not therapists. We are not counselors. We are not trying to fill that void with students. There is nothing in social emotional learning or in the curriculum that we have that deals anything with gender identity or sexual orientation. And finally, it's not trying to replace any type of belief system. Again, what this is it's teaching kids skills and strategies for how to identify emotions, how to understand emotions, how to regulate emotions. For example, one of the tools that we're using in classrooms right now that teachers are developing with students is something called the classroom charter. And in this charter, classrooms have conversations about how do we want to feel in this place? all the way from kindergarten to 5th grade. And some think they might say we want to feel appreciated, or we want to feel happy, or we want to be listened to. And then what does that look like in the classroom? Students are having conversations around how are we going to show those behaviors to each other in the classroom? What specific things are we going to do? So again, it's not replacing a belief system, but it's giving kids skills and strategies and tools to be able to show this in the classroom and in the schools. So what is the purpose of SEL? Why is it important? Research suggests that children with higher emotional intelligence are better able to pay attention, are more engaged in school, have more positive relationships, and are more empathetic. And again, if we're thinking of the kind of students that we want to raise and the children that we want to bring up in Hudsonville, these skills and these measures are things that we definitely want to do. We can also think of how emotions impact learning, right? As adults, we can think of tons of situations of how emotions impact us in our daily life, right? If I have a stressful day at work, that sometimes is going to transfer into how I deal with my family at home, right? Students that are dealing with emotionally charged situations at home might come to school and have a hard time focusing, have a hard time paying attention, have a hard time growing academically. So emotions impact attention and memory, right? If we have heightened emotions, or you're stressed, or you're anxious or nervous, it can be hard to pay attention and hard to remember what's going on in the classroom. It can be difficult to have proper decision-making and judgment, right? Especially if we can think of situations of when you're heightened emotionally, you're upset or frustrated, it can be really difficult to make sound, responsible decisions. Emotions affect relationships. Emotions affect physical and mental health. So students and people that are in constantly stressful or anxious situations, it can affect them physically, but can also affect their mental health in the long term. And everyday effectiveness, right? People who have a harder time regulating emotions and managing emotions have a harder time functioning day to day. They have a harder time in their workplace, harder time in school, harder time being a parent, right? So the last part today that I have is that academic learning is impacted by social and emotional skills and competencies, and that students who are able to manage emotions are more able to persevere and achieve their potential.
Okay. This brings us into alignment, and what we want to think about is how this work aligns with all of the things that Hudsonville has put in place previously, and also why we're prioritizing social emotional learning at this time. So if you look at our journey to ruler, it started in 2019 with PBIS, and for those of you that don't know PBIS, that's Positive Behavior Interventions and Support, and a lot of us also know that as SOAR. There are behavior expectations that we have in our elementary buildings. We were able to embed trauma-informed practices through learning that developmental enhancement shared with us and Dr. Stephanie Grant. That led us into the fall of 2020, coming back from COVID. And the Michigan Department of Ed laid out the Return to Learn roadmap. Our teachers were checking in with students daily. And then we also taught some high leverage rapid response strategies so that teachers could respond to behavior or feelings that students might have come back with after they missed school. In that time, we realized that there was a gap, that teachers were really struggling to meet the needs of some of their kiddos, and in gathering feedback on some of our response strategies, we realized what teachers were asking for is more social emotional learning resources. That led to a committee being put together, and in winter of 2020, we reviewed and evaluated 8 curriculums. And then in fall of 2021, we are piloting Ruler. And the goal of piloting Ruler is to increase district-wide consistency. One thing that Ross mentioned is that a lot of teachers have been implementing social emotional tools within their classrooms, but it has not been consistent. You might have a first grade teen that's using a specific tool, or a 5th grade teacher that feels really passionate about this. But as a district, it was just a little bit disheveled. Our goal is to make sure that all of our teachers have the skills they need to meet the needs of all of our kiddos. If we think about PBIS and SEL, I know that's a lot of acronyms, so that's Positive Behavior Supports and also Social Emotional Learning. They go together really nicely. They include two separate frameworks, but they parallel each other. So if you take a skill from our behavior expectation, such as keep hands and feet to yourself, an SEL competency that parallels that is that students can use positive communication to interact with others. So it's not something that's completely separate. We're just looking at two skills through a lens of behavior and also social emotional functioning. I also wanted to note that a lot of people like donuts and coffee for breakfast. So I always think of our PBIS expectations as the donut and our social emotional competencies as the coffee. I don't even drink coffee, but people say they go better together. And I would say PBIS and SEL are very similar in that way. If you look at this graphic, I want to draw your attention just to the middle section. While there are some differences between PBIS and SEL, there are so many similarities. Both are preventative. Both promote a caring and positive school climate and also foster positive interactions. Both include modeling and teaching as well as explicit skill instruction. So now we need to talk about what's our game plan and our plan to move forward for the remainder of this year. We are piloting Ruler, and that pilot began September 7th. We have a PBIS specialist in every elementary building, and we're able to help prepare and lead professional development so our teachers feel they can implement this tool in the classroom. We're also assigned to a grade level. So you have a grade level expert from pre-K to 5th grade that can answer questions about the curriculum and make any adjustments or modifications so it meets the needs of our students. We also plan to elicit feedback, so we're going to survey our stakeholders throughout the year. That includes staff, students, and families. We want to make sure that this tool is the right fit and that, that we see positive results. So probably most importantly is this is going to help us make adjustments. This is just a pilot year and it's a new curriculum, so there's a learning curve. As far as the Ruler curriculum, this is just a brief overview. Ruler is an acronym and each letter represents a skill or an area of focus. So the R is that students can recognize emotions in themselves and others. The U is that they can understand the causes and consequences of an emotion. L, label, with accurate words and nuanced vocabulary. Express, that they can express their emotions differently depending on context. And the R is that they can regulate emotions with helpful strategies. If you look at our evaluation, there are 3 ways that we can evaluate whether the Ruler is the right tool for us here in Hudsonville. 1, teachers have a performance task. It's the 4th activity at the end of every unit, and it allows a teacher to gauge whether or not students can perform a specific skill, whether it's using the vocabulary or using a specific strategy that was taught. We're also looking at our behavior referral data, knowing that making mistakes is part of learning and we're not looking for perfection, but we're hoping that we would see some positive changes in our behavior data. And then also our teacher feedback to make sure that this tool is a good fit, that our students are engaged, and that we can fill any implementation gaps. This next slide is a brief overview of the communication timeline for our Ruler pilot. We want to make sure that our stakeholders are informed, so we have gotten in front of our inter-school advisory committee, and our next step would be to present to parent clubs. And then in December, we would start the formal board curriculum review process. Talk to us about your questions.
So right now, are the teachers learning about this curriculum and have they started to implement it? And will we implement K through 12? And how does it look like in the high school? I can see where it would work like in elementary and middle school, but with high school, is it during advisory period or where does this sit?
I'm not going to speak to middle school and high school. That isn't part of our plan yet. I'm sure Mandy or somebody else could probably speak to that. Right now, we are just doing pre-K through 5, and we're about a month into it. So we had some teacher development trainings before school started. We met with grade level teams this past week to give them more in-depth knowledge about upcoming units. But we're just, again, in the very early phases of implementation. We just started early in September for pre-K through 5.
It can be aligned K through 12. Will that be the goal to go K through 12 eventually, or?
I think because it's a pilot, we can say that if this is the right fit, we would want, we did choose a curriculum that could be pre-K through 12, yes. So if this curriculum passes the board policy, then yes, over years or however.
I think where we landed with the evaluation stage is that we did feel like it was a confident, good fit for pre-K through 5. And if in the future we look at 6-12 and we come back to that, we know that this will provide alignment, but we didn't necessarily make concrete plans about the timing of that or whether or not how that would meld with the middle school and high school initiative with positive behavior intervention supports. It's just that it has the potential to be an option because it has lessons that will get more developmentally appropriate as kids get older.
And there's different, sorry, I don't sit on curriculum, so there's different curriculums other than ruler. And why did we select ruler compared to other ones?
I think one is just the ability to provide a train-the-trainer model.
I can't hear anything.
Do you want a microphone?
Sure. It's got DEIB. Sure, so the team that reviewed the different curricular options used what's called a hexagon tool, and it looked at different factors that we might perceive through the lens of context, through the lens of training capacity, how many resources it was able to provide, the contextual fit, and the developmental appropriateness. I think the last one was like looking at the longitudinal evidence data. And so each committee member was able to review each of the options separately and provide their own rating or ranking. And then we came back together as a group to look at that overall data and make a consensus about which one we felt was most appropriate to pilot.
Ross and Heather, maybe you could talk a little bit about what we discussed in the curriculum committee meeting about how this is also a tool to engage parents to provide support to them if they're having issues with their child at home.
Yeah, sure. So, oh, that's loud. So like we've kind of said, we've taken some initial steps to just inform parents of what the tool is. There's some communication out coming from principals pretty soon with that. There's an Appleseed article that's going out also. It's our goal in the next month or two to also go to parent clubs and buildings and train them. I think that the more transparent that we can be about the program and the curriculum, that hopefully the better parents feel about this. And there's parent information that's going to come home through the curriculum itself, so parents will be educated about, for example, what their student, similar to kind of what parents are getting now for like, before they start a math unit, they'll make it a little information going home saying this is what's going to be in the math unit. Parents should get something similar about what the ruler curriculum is. They'll also be seeing student work coming home. I know in some of the classrooms that I've been and seen, there's also student work that's happening there. So we're hoping that through some of those avenues with parent clubs and information going home, and again, parents are always welcome to come talk to principals at buildings. The curriculum is available at buildings for parents to look at too. So we're hoping as this pilot year goes on that parents feel more comfortable with the pieces in the curriculum moving forward.
Can you maybe share a couple examples of this in practice? And you shared the example of like a classroom charter and how the class, but can you share a couple more examples of what this like tactically might feel like in the classroom for kids?
Sure. So I was in a second grade classroom and they were learning about the power of positive thinking and shifting from the negative to the positive. And all of the examples were school specific. You're going to do a test, it's something that's really hard for you. And they had a little cartoon and the student was saying, this is not going to go well. I'm not good at this, I'm going to fail. And then the students had to work together to come up with, how could we reframe this so this could be positive, or at least make it more approachable? And then the kids worked in groups and they had to come up with, that student might say, this is really hard, but I'm gonna try my best, and I know my mom is always proud when I try my best. There were just ways to reframe thoughts and things that impact school, and there were several different kind of scenarios. Does that help?
It does, thank you. And then you said, so there's a PBIS specialist in each building, and then, did I hear correctly, each PBIS specialist is also assigned as a grade level
Yes.
expert? And how does that work then across? So it sounds like it's sort of a matrix, like,
It is, it's a little complicated because we are in a building and we're expected to be able to coach pre-K to 5 or K to 5, depending on the building. But also, if I know that Ross is the 5th grade expert and I come across a question that I can't answer, he's my go-to before I connect with the teacher. But I also have a level of understanding of the curriculum. So far, I haven't come across anything that the teacher and I couldn't put our heads together and figure out. But we also have an expert.
So you talk about parent committee, parent group, school parent group meetings, and their staff surveys I've seen in late September and mid-November. So we'll be getting a lot of feedback from parents and from staff, and we'll be both informing, but then also tweaking and modifying based on what we're hearing in terms of making that right fit.
Yes, for sure. We've already started adapting some of the activities if we felt like they weren't the best fit for some of our students. And then we also started putting a survey together already for teachers so that we can make these adaptations quickly.
We as a board can see the results of the surveys and the parent group meetings and get that feedback and give that information.
For sure, yeah. And our parent clubs, when we presented to them, they seemed really excited to have us get in front of their each individual building and felt like any misconceptions that were there could easily be talked through. So we have all connected with our individual parent clubs to get those started. And if there were other topics that parent clubs wanted us to continue to talk on, or a building specific issue or concern, we would definitely be available to coach around that or provide more learning opportunities for families.
Yeah, I have a little bit of Dutch background, so sometimes I live in the land of emotional denial. There might be a parent who would say, I don't want you to get into my kids' heads with regard to emotions. And as a child, might be a child that doesn't want to talk about their emotions for fear of being ridiculed, of saying how they feel. So how do you deal with that?
So one of the tools that comes with this curriculum that we're piloting this year is called the mood meter, and it allows kids to identify emotions with some instruction, vocabulary, and things that kind of go on throughout the year. And there's a check-in that's done in the classroom that can be completely anonymous. So other students are seeing what that kid felt. The teacher is able to see that. And if the teacher wants to do some follow-up with that student, they may, but that's not always necessary. Again, some of that is for identifying patterns. So if we have a student that every day is identifying that they're feeling sad, that might be a red flag for that teacher. If we're kind of noticing some signs from that student physically, maybe their head is down or they're kind of droopy or not speaking up in class, might be kind of a red flag for that teacher, just to be able to check in with that student a little bit more, depending on that. Because this is a pilot year, if a parent was concerned about that, or if a student was concerned about that, we would definitely want to give information to the parent and the student to say, what this is and why this is beneficial. But again, this is a pilot year, so there would be have an option to, possibly not be part of that particular check-in. That being said, though, the things with the curriculum are hopefully going to be ingrained kind of throughout the entire day of students learning, right? So even though there will be chunks of time in the day that's devoted to talking about the class charter or doing the social emotional lesson, we're hoping that the language that teachers are using with students is ingrained in their practice throughout the day, and it just becomes part of that culture and part of that positive climate in that building and in that classroom. Sure. So I think that we would have an opportunity to have dialogue with that parent to inform them about what's going on with the curriculum. If, again, because this is the pilot phase, if the parent wanted to pull their kid out of that SEL time or have some adjustments for that student during that social emotional learning time, that would be a conversation I think that the parent could have with the principal or with us also. But she wants to say something. But also, you know, again, with the point of that some of the concepts that are being taught with this are kind of ingrained throughout the day. So the student would still be part of possibly a charter conversation maybe later in the day. If, you know, again, I'm thinking as a classroom teacher, if my class was having a really hard time at recess that day with mean language or words or whatever, I might bring my class in after recess and we're going to kind of reference our charter and talk about that. If the student wasn't there for the building of that charter during that lesson time, they might have a hard time understanding, like, what is this thing? Why are we following this? What are the words with this? But if a student wanted to opt out or a parent wanted to opt out, that's a conversation I think that could be had with the principal.
I also just want to add to that the check-in is not something that the teacher sits down in a circle and then says, tell me about your childhood, or a serious check-in. It's a little more casual than that. And if a teacher did notice that a student is coming in and maybe is checking in the red zone, that would be an automatic phone call home and a parent and teacher connect. So it's information for parents and also teachers. And I think also your point about some kids not wanting to share things, I think our point of entry with them is that these activities can include characters in books, and it doesn't always have to be a check-in with yourself. You can start to see these feelings are normal because characters feel these, other kids feel these. It kind of normalizes it.
Conclusion of the pilot, I know we identified a few mechanisms of feedback, but how will we know if the pilot's been successful? Like, what are we looking for in general feedback or results?
Okay, the first piece of feedback from the teachers is really tell us about the contextual fit. How did this fit within the scope of your day, and how natural of a fit was it with the developmental appropriateness within your class conversations? I think we also, from the performance task, want to see, are students able to demonstrate that they were able to take away from the lesson target that was shared? So at a very simple level, when we're trying to build vocabulary, we want to have a sense from the performance task that students are able to demonstrate, you know, I understand what this agitated word means, and I can use it in context of either describing a scenario or using it in my writing. And so we're going to be looking for both demonstration of comprehension as well as the teacher's feedback that this was an appropriate contextual fit.
To carry on with Chad's question, and I know it's not a direct relationship of, you know, we're going to see, you know, test scores raised by X amount, but can you talk about academic performance and what you hope to see in the classroom, maybe not a specific child in the classroom?
Yeah, I think because the ties to academic performance, there's so many factors that lead into that. We may never be able to isolate one variable as the attributor to that. But we do hope to see, as the example shared, is that we know that students can develop a sense of worry and anxiety around testing, right? We would want to be able to see that students were able to demonstrate some of those coping strategies or make requests that they've been taught to talk about, this is what I need in this moment, or to be able to advocate for themselves. I think we'd also want to, as we look at behavioral data around conflict, to see as we implement lessons around conflict resolution, are we seeing that students are carrying that out into the playground, in the lunchroom, et cetera. So there's a couple different ways that we'll view the behavioral data, understanding kind of a timeline of here's what our data look like, here's the intervention that we use from the curriculum to address that issue, and if we see a change.
And as we talked about earlier, that'll be continually reviewed with teachers, with classrooms, with parents, and parent club meetings, there'll be a strong engagement with parents.
Yeah, as I mentioned, the units always have a parent home connection so that parents can see some of the examples that students were shared in the classroom and have an opportunity. It's certainly not a requirement, but to say, I understand that you're working around the word confidence. And some of the parent prompting is for the parents to share, this is the time that I felt this way, or when I didn't, that these are some of the coping strategies I used. And so we may not be able to ask sort of effectiveness ratings, but we certainly want to hear from parents about, was this an effective tool in terms of your dialogue for understanding what was happening in the classroom and the carryover into other settings. So sort of that, from the lens from home, how did you see this impacting your child's conversations at home? And I just wanted to mention too, this is not, we're not entering into this as a perceived that there's we're not initiating this in terms of replacing anything that's provided at home, right? We know that as parents, we all support our own children, and we talk about our own identities, our values and beliefs, and our emotional skill set. And so in entering into this curriculum, it's not as though we identify that this because someone's not doing that piece at home. It's because all students benefit from this explicit instruction to be able to learn around this together and also to be able to apply it in the school setting. So I guess I just wanted to name that in case that's one of the worries or wonders.
Maybe you talked about units. Is this something that's set up for daily teaching units? Is it set up for weekly teaching units? How's it structured?
So a unit is composed of 4 lessons that could be broken into any increment of time. The 4 units provide an introductory lesson and then an extension activity. We have an opportunity for the students to engage or apply that skill, and then a performance task. And those units are expected to take about 2 weeks, and our hope is to move through at least 10 units of study this year.
Other questions from the board? Comments? Okay, so it sounds like we'll be seeing this again after survey time and after the PTC, parent group meetings and so forth, and have a chance to continue discussion around this and how it's working and so forth. And then again, our parent community can also engage in parent groups, talk to principals, talk to teachers, lots of ways for our parent communities to be part of the conversation and dialogue. Okay. Good. Any other questions or comments on the board?
Just thank you to Ross and Heather. Thank you for being here tonight and for the work you do. I can see your passion for our kids and supporting teachers, and it's very much appreciated.
Thank you for being here. Great. Okay. Next, we move on. We'll let Ross and Heather get you over here. Again, thank you for being here, Ross and Heather. Actually, yeah. Okay, next we move on to book review guidelines. And you're going to kick it off.
This evening we are going to go over some book guidelines that we've put together. I want to give a little bit of context about when this process started. November of 2019, which feels like forever ago, with all the COVID realities that have happened since then, we started doing a bit of research around board policy, around books. There's a substantial amount of case law regarding censorship. We also started kind of collaborating across the county with other districts who are also Readers and Writers Workshop districts to explore what their book guidelines look like. And what we started to discover is that they're very few and far between. There are not a lot of book guidelines for Readers and Writers Workshop districts around some of the topics that you're going to hear covered this evening. And so all of that research, due to some books that were coming to our attention in November of last fall, then we started to put together some draft guidelines, really in support of our teachers and really prioritizing ensuring that we have age-appropriate books in front of our students in all the various ways that students access books in our classrooms. So Dawn Hirama is here this evening. She is our district-wide ELA chair. So we have various content area committees that our administrators chair. And so there's a group of administrators, instructional coaches were very pivotal in some of this work, administrators as well as some various teacher leaders who have met over the course of many months to refine and adjust and put our heads together about how we proceed with book guidelines to ensure appropriate books are in front of our students each day. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Dawn. Mandy, I think, has projected, and we'll go from there. Doug, are you going to project? Oh, yes, I sure can. I'll turn it over to you, Dawn.
Great, thank you, Amy. I know you can't see that. Did most of you have it on your screens? So, okay. We'll start. We added this first slide really to talk about the core beliefs of the district, and we're looking at this from really a pre-K-12 perspective around literacy. And this is the core subject for any other subject. We really believe as a district this is one of the most important things we do, and that literacy is always going to be tailored to the individual need of every student, whether they're a kindergartner or an 11th grader. And so this work is really important to be specific to kids and every individual student. One of the things that this core belief talks a lot about is the research behind choice reading for kids. And as an adult reader, I think we can all relate to that. When you get a book recommended to you from maybe your older sister and you think, this is the worst book I've ever read, I can't make it through, and you abandon the book. And we have that all the time with kids as well. And the research shows that when kids take a vested interest in what they read, they grow at a more rapid rate and they're more successful in applying that across the curriculum. So that's a huge piece of this core belief statement. One of my favorite authors in the whole world is Kate DiCamillo. She's a children's author, and she has this quote that reading should not be presented to a child as a chore or a duty. It should be offered as a gift. And in that, we hope to cultivate that kids are excited about reading. The irony of this is my 7th grade daughter hates to read so much. And I can't get her. I can read to her sometimes. I'm still working on that. So just believing does not make things automatically happen. So a big piece of this, Amy alluded to it, is creating a structure for our teachers to help guide in promoting safe choices and appropriate choices for kids, while also creating more engagement and transparency options for parents. So as we kind of work our way through this, the next slide is just a real brief overview of the documents. And I think all of you have received copies of the elementary, middle school, and high school guidelines. And so this presentation tonight is just an overview of all of those documents. But there are different types of reading that happen in a classroom. And so we've broken down the documents all the way across. Elementary, middle school, high school are similar, that there are book types where everybody's reading them, some kids are reading them, or maybe one child is choosing a book for him or herself. So that's kind of the overview of the documents. They kind of follow that same structure. So I'm going to walk you through each piece of that, and then it might be easiest to stop after each type and have you ask questions. You let me know if you want me to keep going, but I think because they're different, and then if I'm going to address your question down the road, I'll just tell you I'll keep moving. So the first big area that we're going to talk about are books that are read to all kids in a classroom. So either kids read them themselves or they are read by a teacher. So you'll see that first thing says mentor text. In our kindergarten through 5th grade classrooms, we have board-approved a curriculum, the units of study, and both in reading and writing, there are books that are maybe a chapter book or a picture book that is connected to a lesson. And teachers typically don't read the entire book, but they're going to read a portion of that book. But they're reading that to the entire class at one time. And those books are part of a curriculum that's already been board approved. Our middle school is currently piloting that same units of study, so that's not yet board approved, we're in that process. But the texts that are used as mentor texts, where they pull a snippet of a chapter book or something out, are part of that curriculum. The next big thing that everybody would read would be in primarily a high school classroom, the whole class novel. We almost never do this in an elementary setting. The range of reading skill is so great that that's not really an appropriate tool to use in an elementary classroom. In middle school, it happens very occasionally, but in high school, and any time that happens, that comes from an already board-approved list. So most of you have been part of that process over the years, and that list has been present. If a teacher were to add a book to that list, he or she would have to have that book approved through the process that's outlined in the high school document to add another book that they would read as a whole group. And then the third thing on here is a little more fluid, elementary read-alouds. And if you have been an elementary teacher or in elementary classrooms, you'll realize we don't want you guys to have to approve all those books. In any first grade classroom, you might read 5 books in a day. You choose books based on what's happening. You're responding to a recess behavior, and you have a favorite book that talks about how to be friends on the playground, and you grab that book and read it real quick before we go back to our math lesson. Those books are books that we're going to ask teachers to use. There's a tool in these documents. There's called a book read aloud vetting tool that really isolates a couple of different factors. This is going to come up over and over again with different types of books, but they're looking at the appropriateness for the context, the appropriateness for the age group of the kids, and what they're trying to teach. And so we're working to trust the professionalism of the teachers, but also have a tool in place that they can run those books through that tool. Most teachers, if it's a picture book, they've already read it. But we're saying, if you're going to read a book to your class, you need to have read it. Read the book yourself. Don't put yourself in the situation where you're halfway through a book and, whoops, wasn't what I was thinking. So there's a couple of features that are all embedded in this to sort of ensure that the read-alouds that are rapidly flowing through an elementary classroom are vetted. There's so many great books that are published every year as well, and our elementary teachers are avid book purchasers, and so we want them to continue to grow their libraries, but also vet those through that tool. So those are books that are read to all kids at the same time. Does anybody have questions specific to that, or should I just keep rolling?
I have some questions. So I received everything Friday night.
So I received everything on Friday night, and there's a lot here. So was there any consideration of just having one guideline that would say like mentor texts, and this is the process for elementary, middle school, high school, just to condense all this? I guess that's just an observation that I made. Some of the questions I had, so mentor texts. So what happens if you talk about how, let's say in the curriculum, we approved book A, but a teacher on their own starts to read book B, but we really don't know that that's even happening. How do we know that the teachers are reading the approved books? And I only bring that up because at previous board meetings, some parents have spoken about some books that have been read, or content has been read at the middle school, and I forget the name of the books, but I was concerned with the book content. And I don't know if they were approved. So how do we, I guess there's a trust factor in this, and I guess I have a little, my trust isn't where it probably needs to be right now regarding the books. So I guess who monitors the mentor text to make sure that we're reading what's been approved by the curriculum? Because how do we know unless someone tells us that they're not? I mean, is there a list of books that are approved to be read via the curriculum that could be distributed for each grade level? I guess that's one question. I guess I had that question for high school as well. So that was my question for mentor texts.
The short answer is yes. There is an approved list. There's a list of books for high school, in particular of the whole class novels that they use, and then all principals have access to the elementary and middle school curriculum. If a teacher were to swap out a book, say at my building in a 5th grade classroom, they said, you know, I'm really tired of this novel that I'm using as a mentor text. I've read it every year and I'm just looking for a new book to freshen this up for the kids and for myself. That would go through part of these processes. They would have to take it through a vetting tool, talk about it with their grade level team, talk about it with me, and then they could swap it out if that was a mutually agreed upon decision. The idea is that we're not making those decisions in isolation, and then that could then be included on the document that has the list of approved 5th grade mentor texts because it's been through a process.
So if I was a parent right now in the district and my child was in 3rd grade, who would I contact to get the approved list of what would be a mentor text? Do we have that? Or
Yeah, that you could contact the principal or your teachers in 3rd grade to pull out the list of mentor texts.
It's consistent across the district, so every 3rd grade, every one of the elementaries would have the same list.
Yes. The next area is book clubs, and I think there'll be more questions around this, so we'll try to take this one bite at a time. So the book clubs are situations where students are given the opportunity to select a book to read with peers. So 5 kids read the same book at the same time. And the book clubs really don't start in earnest in this way until 4th or 5th grade and continue on. They're happening in middle school and high school as well. And those books are not part of a set approved curriculum per se. So we're working, right now, we've created a process so that we can give parents more information on the front end and still maintain kids having the opportunity to choose. Because what we don't want to do is take away student choice, because we know the literacy research says that's the biggest impact. So the process looks like this. If I am teaching 7th grade, we're creating a 7th grade book club list. It has the list of 10, 12 books that are going to be offered to students. And there's a vetting tool that you may have seen. It's part of each of the documents. In the vetting tool, there are resources that are live links, and we created a spreadsheet that can go to parents multiple weeks before the unit begins. So they're going to have the book title and author, and then they'll have links to resources like Common Sense Media, which were really and Compass book ratings, and each of those things give a age appropriateness level, and then they're looking at sex, violence, language, educational value, and positive messaging, so that parents then can click on that. You get an opportunity, maybe you've used it for the movies. A lot of people use it for movies with kids or whatever. Not a lot of people use it for books, but it's amazing. And you can see a whole summary of the book. It will give you detailed information about the language. So if you click on it, if it has a 1 out of a 5, you can see what the words that you might have questions about. If it's a 4 out of 5, you can see the words that were used in that book. Parents then have a couple of weeks to sift through those things if they choose to, and then they'll work with their child to list their top, depends on the teacher, she may say, top 3 that you want to be part of. And then if you choose that there's a book that you want to opt out of, parents would then list that book. Like, this is not appropriate for our family. Please don't put my child in this book. Parent signs that, and it goes back to school. Teachers then utilize that information, reading level, interest of the students, all the other factors like who can't work in a group well together, who does work well in a group together, in order to make the book clubs. So we're trying to give kids the choice and do all that book talking at school while also informing parents, these are all the books that are even coming before your kids. If you don't prefer your child to read one, you don't have to. An example might be if you have a sensitive student and one of the books in the nonfiction or the historical fiction book club unit has a higher level of violence around a World War II. Maybe you want to opt out of that book. And that would be perfectly appropriate and completely fine for parents to do. And they would know that based on the violence level and the age appropriateness of looking at the tools that we've provided ahead of time. Those will be the same that will be available for all teachers in all buildings. There's some level of difference based on availability of text. So in a 5th grade at Park, I may not have the exact same books as a 5th grade at South because of the history of purchasing books, and these aren't directly tied to curriculum. But no books will go onto that list that aren't collectively agreed upon as the district team. High school, the process looks just a little bit different because of the level of maturity of the student and the complexity of the texts. The student actually chooses the one book, and the parent has to sign off on the book choice before the kids can be in the book group.
So a couple questions on the book club. So at the elementary level, the child selects the book. Is there a permission slip that goes home? Does the parent approve it?
That's the process. At an elementary, we aren't using book clubs until the upper elementary, and it would follow that same process. We'd send home the spreadsheet. Parents will get a list of the book titles, authors, and information about each text ahead of time.
What happens if the permission form is either not returned or it's returned and there's no parent signature?
Well, we're trying really hard to inform parents through parent newsletters from teachers, sending home the paper copy. We can email, but if we don't get that back, we're going to do our best to put the student into a reading group that we feel is most appropriate for the student.
And then at the high school level, are students aware of the group placement before the parent signs the permission slip, or does the teacher put them in groups and then gets the permission slip? Because if I had, let's say I had a student and they were in a group of, let's say, 4 or 5, and all of a sudden my mom said, I can't read that book, and now I'm removed out of that group, that student could feel very uncomfortable or be kicked on, or...
This is a process that the high school's actually been using for quite a while. So they don't put them in groups as much as the students select their books that they would like to read. And once it's approved, then teachers begin to place groups together.
And then the last one, on this appendix 2, the book vetting key, there's all these ratings. Are there any ratings that as a district we deem unacceptable to have the book in our classroom or anywhere in the district?
We do have a process for that. We're looking at, it's complicated because the book itself may be appropriate in a 10th grade classroom and not in a 7th grade classroom. So we're looking at the age appropriateness of the book, the level of violence, the level of sex, the level of the language being used, and even the readability of the text. So in terms of creating the book lists for the grade level teams, those things are done in a grade level committee where we have lots of trusted educators who have English degrees and are building the lists together. So in fact, we do have books that we've, as a district, collectively said, we're not going to include that on the list. One teacher may say, hey, I want that on my list. We're not going to do that. It has to be a collectively agreed upon decision to join the list.
Are there any, like for example, let's say a book, like someone brought a book here at a board meeting and it had the F word.
Yep.
Would a book that had the F word be allowed, or would it be automatically excluded according to this vetting key? I'm trying to figure out how some of the books got in.
It wouldn't necessarily be excluded based on the vetting key. If you looked at the several different ratings and we knew that there was high educational value, and there are books that have language for no good reason in them. And sometimes there's a word or two in the book to try to build context and really make a point. There's high value. Again, parents will get that ahead of time, and a parent might say, I don't want my child to see those words or read those words. Another parent may determine, hey, that's a conversation I want to have with my student, and I can see the educational value in understanding how to respond in that situation. So it's not that black and white. This is super complicated. And so we want to give parents that transparency so that, because we have parents who have lots of divergent opinions on what would be the best fit for their child. So we want to put that tool back in their hands and use the teacher expertise to pare down that list of these books have high educational value, and here's what you might want to know as a parent. There might be a word that you don't find appropriate. Please know you can check that out and know ahead of time and opt out of that text.
I agree. I just want to know that as a parent, I would have access to this information.
You do. It will come home a couple weeks before the unit, so you can go through each of the books and determine what's best fit for your family.
Oh, one more comment. So on Appendix 6, the parent letter for the, that's independent choice reading.
Dawn, if at any time a parent has a concern, I mean, I understand they get the book, they get notification of the book, they can inform the school relative to, I don't want my child to read this book or not. But at any time, if a parent has a concern about, maybe I didn't pay enough attention to it when it first came home, or the titles, but I've learned more, what's the avenue to say, I have a concern, I need to talk to somebody about this concern?
At any time, a parent has the right to restrict their own child's reading. So you could pull your kid right out of a reading group at any point. You would contact the child's teacher and say, hey, this is my concern, I'd like so-and-so to switch to a different book. And we would accommodate that. First, start with the teacher. Yeah.
Principal,
Yep.
Teacher, principal.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
And that is anytime?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions on this book clubs? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I read
That's okay.
other things, so.
Lots of good questions. The next piece of, did somebody have a question that I missed?
No, I don't know if page 11.
You are on the right page. So, the next piece is around choice reading, where individual students select a text out of either a classroom library or the building library. And when you look at the documents, one of the things that it's tough as a community member or a parent to realize, like, teachers haven't read every book, and they can't and they won't, because new books are coming out all the time. Teachers have read lots of books, but we as a district cannot read every book in every library. It's just not possible. And so what we're going to name that and say that's just going to be the truth of what's in a library in any school. What we want then to be able to do is to support teachers as they purchase new books for their library with this vetting tool, that at any point, if it's a book you're unfamiliar with, we want teachers to utilize that vetting tool so they can throw that title through the same process, the same spreadsheet that you were just looking at, Barb, and understand the age appropriateness, the reading level of the book, the details of language and any of the violence factors depending on the age level, if there's any sexual content in that book, so that they make an informed decision. We aren't saying it has to be in this range, but what we are saying is we want teachers to choose age-appropriate texts for their school. If the main character is an 18-year-old, it might not be the best fit in a 5th grade classroom. That book still might be a great book, but it probably belongs in a high school library. So there's some flexibility there. But students have the ability to choose texts, and parents at any time, similar to what you had just asked, can decide for their child to restrict what they read and say, this is a book, we don't want my child to read that, and I want you to select a new text tomorrow. There's sort of a simple process for this to say parents are the ultimate decider for their own child in terms of what they read. It does mean that parents have to take an active role, and part of this is that's a positive thing. We want parents engaged and participating with this with us as educators and as students. So the more mom and dad know about what I'm reading, the more we can talk about that, the better conversation we have, and the more that becomes part of our family life. That's a good thing. But we aren't going to be able to have intimate knowledge of every text that every student picks up from every library. So this does shift ownership to parents, but they also have access to those tools that are part of the vetting process. So if a parent doesn't have time, which I will freely admit as a mom of middle school and high school kids, I don't have time to read what they're reading. But I can take the book titles that they have and utilize some of these tools to be better informed than I ever was before, so that I can put that book through that process and say, oh man, why are you reading that? Or tell me about this book. It sounds really interesting. What are you thinking about it? And have some of those conversations with the kids.
So I'll just say that I was a bit uncomfortable. It was in all the guidelines, and I know you touched on it. The wording was we could not read each book we select for our libraries, but we exercise our professional judgment as trained teachers to support students as they choose books that will encourage students to read. I will just say I'm a little uncomfortable with that, and I know there's a lot of books. And maybe the teachers have too many books in their classroom libraries, and we need to utilize the media center more. I'm just concerned, do students ever just read a book choice at school and it never goes home? So maybe mom or dad, guardian, they're not even aware of what they're reading. I don't know. I was just, when I read it in all three, for me that made me uncomfortable. I just thought I just know as a teacher I would never assign something or have something that I'm not familiar with.
I can appreciate that. And our intention would be that teachers utilize that vetting tool if they're purchasing new books. And in most scenarios, teachers are reading books, but that's also true where we order sometimes 150 books at once from, a scholastic list where we're looking at the reading level, we're looking at the context, we're looking at, and in order to put them in the library, we trust the tools that we're utilizing so that we can offer more opportunity for eyes on text for kids. And there are also divergent opinions from families about what they feel is what they want their child to have access to. So what we're hoping to do with a library is create a diverse library and create opportunity that's age appropriate for the students who are accessing it.
I guess as a parent, I would need to be educated on all of these tools. So what is the plan to educate parents on how they can investigate the books that their children are selecting?
That'll come.
I think most parents would know. I was reading this and I didn't know all this existed.
No, right. I think it's exciting for parents to have access to some of these things. So the vetting tool is more complicated, but I think for parents to, even through school newsletters and teacher newsletters, just to have access to the links, just on a very basic level, gives them a wealth of resources. So those things will absolutely be available to all parents at all levels. Mm-hmm.
And then for Appendix 6, which discusses Appendix 6 is a parent letter reading independent choice reading. On it, we've got Riley Middle School, their initials in the letter, so I think maybe this letter was focused for Riley Middle School, and I think it's just an example. Okay, just an example, because the same letter was attached for the high school one. And I thought, will we tailor these to Riley, Baldwin, high school so that they're different for the different?
The intention is that at the beginning of a year, or when this process comes to some conclusion this year, that would go home to all students in a middle school, elementary, or high school appropriate version, so that all parents would then have some information about the district policy on choice reading, have access to some of the resources we just mentioned, and feel like they have a little bit more transparency about what their students are reading.
Does each teacher maintain a choice list for their classroom library that would give like a title and a brief description, or is that too much?
Yeah.
Dawn, I know when our students were in middle school, I believe it was, they were provided with a list sort of at the end of the year, knowing what they might be reading in 8th grade. That was helpful for me as a parent and to be an accountable parent to do my homework over the summer and say, okay, I'm familiar with some of these books. Some of them I don't know. Check them out of the library and read for yourself. Now that was before the day of common sense and all these other tools that we're using. But is that still something they do, or is that something that we could possibly introduce as another option for parents to be able to have that information ahead of time?
Yeah, I think that would certainly be a possibility to share that over the summer, especially at some of those more complex text levels where parents maybe do want to read the whole book.
And for me personally, it was an opportunity for me to have those conversations in the summer with my students and say, you know, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't like that book. And be able to proactively have those conversations with your students.
Can I ask another question about the whole class novels? And I think this is specific to, I think, the high school. It says that full-length books that are to be read by an entire classroom of students are carefully considered. Before a book is required of a student, the book is reviewed by a committee that includes teachers, administrators, and community members. So I was wondering, who are the community members? How are they selected? And then I went further down in the review process. It says this committee, consisting of the ASCI, the Hudsonville High School English Department Chair, 2 or 3 other staff administrator representatives, and sometimes, though not always, a parent staff member who is also a parent. So does that mean that up here we talk about and a community member, but when we get down to the review process, there's not always a community member, because I'm not sure if the community member is a parent. I'm confused. You know,
I know, that is really specific to the high school process, which has been in place for a long time. So I'm going to speak to that from my best guess, is that there have been parents and community members involved at times, and other times it has been part of the English department recommending books. And then those books, that's the list that's already board approved, that has come to you in years past. So the committee puts together a list of recommendations for a whole class, and then those books are brought to you for approval, and that's a finite list that's already been there for quite some time.
since we're looking at this policy and these guidelines, is there a way to tighten up this language so it's a
Yeah,
little bit clearer?
I think I can see Amy taking a note over there. Okay, there's 2 more sections of this. One has a couple slides, but the big topic is donations of books, which is a whole different beast in and of itself. So one area that schools experience donations is from an organization or a group. And this happens not frequently, but it certainly happens where groups drop off texts and want them put in the library. And so we're putting a process in place so that those books are reviewed and then placed appropriately if they are appropriate text for the school. So the first process would be the teacher comes to the principal, would be notified, and they look at a building level committee, looks at the books. There's an appendix that kind of guides that, but it's using the same type of vetting tools. Sometimes we're donated, hundreds of books. So where we utilize the tool then to expedite the process, and then that list is then shared with the curriculum office, for final approval. Part of what we know when books are donated, the people donate them don't always know the best age level to donate, so part of that process might be to thank the donors and move the books to the middle school if they're not appropriate at an elementary level.
Who are the curriculum office reps?
It would be, I mean, I think we're noting that it would be anyone who works for the curriculum office could serve as a representative on that committee. The second way that we, and well, there's two other ways that we're talking about donations. One being families donating books to teachers. That happens frequently where someone's going through their home library and they box up 60 books and bring them to school and say, hey, can you guys use these books? We're getting rid of them. We'd rather have school use them instead of just toss them. So teachers then have to use that book vetting tool in order to place any unfamiliar texts in their library. We get a lot of books that we already know. And if a parent donates a book that we're familiar with, that's certainly allowable to just put onto the shelves in classrooms. This last thing with teacher wish lists online, we're putting some more stringent policies in place here so that donations, one thing to note, anything that's donated in this manner is a district property, not the individual property of the teacher. And those books then, before they are put on the list that a teacher would publish, have to go through the vetting tool and then also work with their teammate to determine the appropriateness of the list that would be put out there for purchase by parents, which lots of teachers utilize that tool, an Amazon wish list or other donors choose, things like that.
So I had a question regarding that, and you talked about this. It sounds like this is new. This one's new. So teachers must review lists with content teams, departments, and administrators before posting on public forums. It seems like teachers typically would post their wish list prior to the start of the school year. So are all these people in play over the summer to approve this for it to get posted for families to purchase, let's say, going back to school? Or are these wish lists posted throughout the year?
Both, I think, are a possibility. Teachers might post a wish list around like maybe the holiday season or different things like that, or they may post them before school begins, but they wouldn't be able to do that if they couldn't access their grade level team or their administrator. So if I were the principal, I would expect that a teacher would send their list to me and to their teammates. And if we were in the Upper Peninsula and unable to respond to that, they were on hold until, as a collective, we could approve the list. His question was, are donated books worth the trouble? I think it...
People donate books to me from time to time, don't read books, and I'm a nice guy, I don't hurt their feelings.
Yeah.
And some of them, I want to say, really, I don't want to do this. I don't want to have staff, administrators taking up time with donated books if we don't really need donated books.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think teachers really do appreciate the donation of books for their classroom libraries. It's an expensive and really important feature of classrooms to build that opportunity for choice for kids. So I think if you ask any elementary or really maybe all the way up through high school, like they're so excited to have more books donated to their classroom. So I think we could work around it, but it is something that we value, and it's a nice way for parents to give back to the school. We have a lot of parents who love to do that, who feel like it's a way for them to support their teacher and their school and to be actively a part of that community. So I think the answer is it could go both ways, but it's a nice give and take that is, it's been really appreciated by staff.
Is the media center like going away?
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what the purpose of what I would call the library beautiful media center. But what are we gonna use it for? Do students, I don't know, do students go to the
Students go to the media center weekly.
There's not a media center in Hudsonville. There's a book vault.
Book vault.
Book
Sure.
vault. Okay, what's the book vault?
Well, we have, depends on your building. Right now, because of space is a big factor for us, but in an elementary building, middle school and high school, we all still have a media center. Students in the elementary go to the media center weekly to check out books. And the purpose of having that access is, if I'm a third grade teacher, I have a nice classroom library, but I have far fewer book choices for students to access and read. And this gives them lots and lots of access to books. And so we do continue, like a book vault is a part of our media center, is a lot of space also. So people used to work in their libraries and spend a lot of time in there. We're moving space to other collaborative workspaces and making the book vaults or book rooms a space that houses books versus people working in other things at the same time. They, like the 5-6 building has lots of collaborative workspaces as well. But the books will still be available for checkout.
Do you really need a book vault with all these classroom libraries? I guess that's my question. I mean, I do at the elementary level, kids are so excited when they go to the library, once a week and they check out their books, they love that. But I think about the library media center that's right around here for the high school, that's got all kinds of books in it.
Kids do check out, and I think it's economically, it's financially responsible to utilize that. So if there's 1,000 books available there, every classroom can't have 1,000 books available. So if I have 100 books in my classroom, students still have access to all those other texts.
I'm thinking if we have all these books in the classroom, it would be so much better to have them in the library because you have more access and then there's more books to pick from for everyone.
That seems like a great question. So part of that is in the instructional model. So going back to what Amy Taylor was talking about at the beginning with the way the classroom functions, kids are selecting books. They might go to the media center, but they are continually selecting books. And so if they have to, every time they go to read widely down to the library, that gets really cumbersome. So especially in an elementary classroom or a middle school classroom where kids are reading independently and choosing those books frequently, it's a huge value add to have those available to them right where they are. But we don't want to limit them from also being able to access the library and have more choice.
Don, if a book goes through the vetting in one building, let's say it gets donated at Forest Grove, do we capture that knowledge in the district? And do other buildings know that this book has been vetted and teachers have the opportunity to perhaps know what they were trying to build their library, what books could be grade level appropriate for the class?
Yeah, we hope to create a list. Now, I think it depends on the question specifically. It doesn't take long to run a title through the vetting tool, but if we have books that have been approved and like books that are donated and things like that, we will create lists for that. We don't want to create a 10,000 page or item list of all the books that are appropriate, but I think we will definitely have a list of books. The last thing on here is what's the process for a parent who has a concern about a book, and so for that process, once it's completed, if a book has been through that vetting process and through the committees, it would go on to an approved list so that we aren't going through that process in every single school.
Well, because it seems like naturally then the next question would be if there's a concern that comes up and the district determines it wants to remove a book, that we wouldn't want to have to replicate that process by building.
No.
Either, that we would want to be able to say, if we deemed it inappropriate, we pulled it.
Correct. Yes.
Especially in those cases where that might have been a very difficult discussion and a hard discussion to come to.
Yeah.
I appreciate the effort the teachers make to have a classroom library and that some students are intimidated by the media that is equally important to having the media center as the go-to place.
Ready to move on to, there's one last slide. So this is more of an official process than it has been in the past in order to allow for concerned parents who come across a book that they feel is inappropriate for the school system. And before going through this, I think it's important to note that we want to be clear that we already believe that every parent has the complete right to restrict what their child reads. But not what all children read, because we do have families with very differing values. And so this process is in place if you come across a book that you feel is inappropriate for the school library or for the classroom library. There is a formalized process for parents to follow, and they submit their concern to the principal and the team, filling out this particular form that's connected in the appendix, and then it goes to a principal teacher team to review at that grade level and in that building. And if the team agrees that it's inappropriate, it says that the book will be moved. And that means multiple things, because we know that there are books that we might determine are inappropriate at a particular level, but still have high educational value, maybe at a higher grade level. So we might move a text to the high school, for example. It could also be removed. Both of those are possible. And if they disagree, then the book would continue to be used. And we've outlined a process that's multi-step so that if a parent still has a concern and disagrees with that, they can meet with their principal, and then that will continue through multiple steps so that ultimately there's a stakeholder committee, and that does include parents. It's outlined in the document that there are, I think, 2 parents, grade level team, administrators, and then if and when that was still contested, ultimately it would go to the assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction to review all of the work that had been done up till that point and ultimately make a final decision on the book if it made it that far.
And there's no appeal beyond that level?
Correct.
How are the parents selected to get them from?
At this point, we haven't outlined exactly how parents would be selected. So we know that we want to have parents part of that process. And so we had talked about parents who are part of the parent club board, people who are vested in the school, and put, I think, a list of people who volunteer to be part of that process, because it's not going to be an easy job. There you might have to read multiple books and really invest some time.
And I just had one comment. I think it's Appendix 4 from the high school, the secondary book review committee form, just because I work a lot with rubrics. So on here we have where you check the appropriate summary box. We have very good, fair, poor. How do you rate those ratings? And the same thing where we have no problems, few problems, many problems, several problems. Is few problems like 1 to 3, many problems 4 to 6, several problems greater than 7. I guess how do you quantify those terms when you're looking at the rubric? Just something to think about. You know, as you're very positive impact, fair impact, negative impact. And I just think it's when you're rating a rubric, I don't know, just something to think about, maybe quantifying it a little bit better.
Are there other questions?
Other questions, anyone? Comments from the board? Amy, I know you were taking notes as we were talking through. Can you just run through some of the actions, things that we talked about that you captured to make sure that all
how are parents selected for the individual,
One of the notes that I have is to review and articulate more clearly in the guidelines how the parents are selected. We had conversation at the committee level that each individual building would get a group of parents together, and so articulate that in the guidelines. Review the rubric at the high school. I will mention that's a rubric that they've used for probably a couple of decades, so a review is likely appropriate, so we can do that.
We use rubrics all the time at the college level, so I'm looking at that, and I'm like, how would we score that when I teach faculty how to grade a paper? You know, when we're looking at grammar.
Sure.
One grammar error, 3 grammar errors, how do you rate that? So that you're consistent when you review it, everyone is reviewing it consistently.
Absolutely. So that's an action that I have. And then the other one that I noted was add a parent member as part of the review team at the high school. So making sure that that language that Barb was talking about is consistent in those 2 sections at the high school. Are there other actions that I...
Oh, yes, whether or not they would continue that method that they used to have of providing book
Oh, the
lists
summer.
in the
Yes.
spring.
Yes.
Or the next year.
Yep. So the possibility, I wrote that on a different piece of paper, giving that information ahead of time at the end of 7th grade, for example, what will the 8th graders be reading? Thank you.
Did we capture everything? Did we miss anything? I'm getting a lot of great information here, good discussion, and thank you for answering all the questions. Also, you guys did a good job of that. But I don't want to leave here and make sure we capture their comments or questions or concern.
So it sounds like if I'm a concerned parent who just wants to know what the kids are going to read, the whole class novels and the book clubs, those books that are being either assigned or discussed aloud are for the most part on a list somewhere available for parental viewing, with the exception of perhaps the whole class books in the elementary classroom that the elementary teachers are reading lots and lots of whole class books
The
regularly.
read-alouds, yes.
But those are in the teachers' libraries in the classroom. The choice reading is something where we're really dependent on the parental relationship with the kids and knowing what the kids are reading. But there is a clear process that if there's concerns about those books, one, contact the teacher immediately to pull that book. But then 2, if they're concerned that the book should not be available in the district, there's a process then to bring that to the attention. I think knowing how the process was outlined, I think the only thing that would be helpful is also if there were some type of reporting mechanism. I don't believe per se on an individual book level, but perhaps some reporting to the board of how often these requests or complaints came in, the nature of them, that gave us the opportunity to ask for additional information if we found out, we received 200 requests about a single book and it's still on the shelves versus 200 requests about different books but a single request each time. I just think it'd be helpful data to have at some point. I'm glad that there's a process and appreciate that you put something together, putting it out there for parents.
And we will develop a system where all of those books go. So I think adding some language about reporting to the board on books that are on review, so to say, at any given time, or an annual or biannual. I guess we'll have to see how this goes, right? To determine, but we can certainly talk about a timeline for that ongoing review.
Amy just said there needs to be a process for parent education on how to look up all these scores. Because you can look up, there's a lot, in the policy, there was a lot of links that I could click, and I clicked on them. There was a lot that you could look at.
So as an example, there are 2 book clubs that are launching right about now. So 7th grade parents received a letter along with their book list filled out with that vetting key with all those links. So within that letter, then it explains, click on the colored links or those are, look for the colored text, those are links that will take you to more information. And then there's also an 8th grade book club that is launching, and parents will receive a letter if they haven't already. It will be this week. And so that would be similar. They're getting a letter from the teacher saying this is the book club. 8th grade is characterization, so they're analyzing characters. And then here are the books. Teachers are not to add to the list or take away from the list. That is the list.
So that is tighter than it has been. So some of the pieces that we outlined this evening have been in place, but many have not. And so most of what you see before you this evening is new.
And Amy Chad talked about the reporting back to us on the review process. It'd be nice, I think, to know too, who were the community members that did that review.
Absolutely.
So we know what building administrators were involved.
Yes.
And what parents were involved in the vetting process.
Absolutely. That was our vision as well. The title of the book, the date the review started, who was on that review, what the outcome was, when it was finalized, and all of those pieces for that historical record. Because if somebody, for example, at Dawn's building proposes a review of a book, and then somebody at Forest Grove also proposes the book, that would be the principal's first stop to say, has this book already been reviewed in the district, and what was the final determination, so that we're not like chasing our tail all the time.
I just want to thank you. I know this was a ton of work. It was a ton of actual time.
It's valuable work. I think the entire committee and our instructional coaches and under Dawn's leadership really feel good about what we have in place. I think that just like anything, there'll be things that come up that we go, ooh, we didn't consider that. We need to process that. So your feedback this evening is extremely helpful with our just different brains. You get so used to reading it over and over in the dialogue that we've had that new brains and eyes on it is really helpful to us. So thank you. Any other questions?
Other questions, comments?
Don, thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate your leadership. It's important work. Parents want to have a process they can be confident in as well. So I know it's tough work. I just really appreciate your leadership.
Nice job. Okay. Thank you, Don. You see that here? Okay, next on the agenda, we have survey.
Yeah, real quick, we've finalized 4 surveys that we're working on right now. We call them climate surveys. They're not in incorporation with what we've done with school improvement in the past. We've added some additional questions to seek feedback from our community members. We do have one that will go to staff first to get some feedback, 13 questions. I did working with the association to make sure that those conversations take place ahead of time so that they're well aware of what we're seeking to do. And those meetings took place today, so we're looking at sending it out to our staff at some point, hopefully this week. We'll follow that up with a survey to our community members, to our parents that have kids in the district, getting feedback from them. Following that, and it'll all be laid out with a letter to the parents also that lays this out. And then we'll follow up with 2 surveys to our students. We have a secondary and an elementary survey. We did switch the Likert scale around a little bit, so it starts with strongly agree to strongly disagree. Obviously, there'll be some questions that our elementary students will need parents to help walk them through and fill out the surveys, but we'll figure all that out. So that'll give us some feedback moving forward. I know we've had a lot of questions about whether it's diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, whether it's inclusion, belonging, the terminology, all those conversations. We also then will be, part of that survey is we're asking parents that want to be involved deeper in this conversation. We'll see people that are saying, yes, I want to be involved. Give us your information, your email address, that's all we need. And then we'll follow that up with a longer email so that we have I would say a nice makeup of community members that want to be involved in this process. Obviously, we can't have 900 people involved with committee work, but we're looking for a kind of a well-rounded sense from our community to get together and have deeper conversations. If we do this survey now, we'll then allow us to do something very similar, maybe in the spring or right near the end of the year, trying to compare where are we in the future when we do this, and then what do we want to do moving forward. So that's our first go around to get feedback from our community as well as seek people that might be interested. We're also asking parents that may be interested in our sex ed advisory panel. We have some parents that are no longer part of that group, and that group meets on a regular basis. So we want to follow a similar format as we followed with the sex ed advisory board, so we can get a well-rounded group of constituents to help have conversations around this work. What it looks like moving forward, and to what extent we move forward, that's our next step. So start with feedback, and then come back to the board and talk about what the feedback looks like and what avenues we might want to get people together and have deeper conversations about actually taking to that point. What actions are taken to what level? I can't answer that because I don't know what the feedback looks like. We can speculate on feedback on both areas. And until we know what that feedback looks like, it'd be hard to tell too far. So that's our next step.
Two questions.
Yes.
We didn't have an exact date, but ballpark timeframe of when we would review the survey results in our work session?
Yeah, so I think if we send the
Months,
survey out, well, I definitely want to do it, I would say November. I'm speculating on November. I know we have some conflicts in October. By the time we get feedback, we want to remind parents to fill out the survey, to get that information. Again, it's not a long survey. It's not like our last survey that was 120 questions. I want to say there's 20 or 30 questions. I don't think off the top of my head. Maybe 20 questions for the parent. I think there was only 7 or 8 questions for elementary kids. But I'm thinking if we get some of that information back, we can break the data down and get together, even if it's early November. Take a look at it.
Okay. And then the second question, the student survey, will parents have a chance to understand what's on that, the questions on that student survey?
Yeah, so our intent would be to share that with the parents. Our hope is that the kids will still fill out the survey and not have too much help, if that makes sense.
Understand, yeah.
Throwing that out.
But
So
the
intent would be to, we want the parents to know what's on the survey. The intent would be to say, here's a PDF version of what we're going to ask your son or daughter, so that you can have those conversations with your son or daughter. If a student answers a question in a way that might not be favorable, that conversation at home might be more important than the conversation at school about why they feel that way or what's going on at school. So yes, we want the parents to see what the kids are being asked, but we want the kids to answer the question.
So as parents have been asking, what's the plan for DEIB or what we're going to do moving forward, is it safe to say, Doug, that you're surveying students, parents, the community, based on those survey results that will help guide what we do going forward?
Yeah. That'll guide the work that a group of people will do. Not me, not our cabinet, not our administration team, but a group of constituents that hopefully is well-rounded. Say, okay, what do you think our next step should be? And it's hard to speculate on what that might look like.
But right now, we are not doing anything in regards to DIB or that initiative.
Sure. So we had October 22nd professional development that we had earmarked for that. We have changed the mindset along that date, primarily because we want to make sure we do the back-end work. We initially had talked about this 2 years ago when we had these conversations, and a lot's changed. So we want to make sure we get some feedback from our constituents before we do anything else.
And this is really toward that broader goal of all students feel secure, safe, welcome all the time.
Yeah.
That's really what
Yep, that's correct.
Remind me again, when do we expect that to go out?
I just got done meeting with the association today, so we want to get that information to our staff. We want them to we want to get some of their feedback. And then we're hoping to get, I would anticipate it'll go out to parents by the end of next week.
I like that word that we're doing, staff first. Okay, other questions, comments on the survey process? And I think Barb raised an excellent point around this is helping to lay the groundwork for all the kids out there, and there's something that's going on in the meantime. So. Okay, anything else on survey? Okay, we move on to one action item that we have here in the agenda today around some job descriptions. Those were sent out on Friday. Are you walking through
I am. Would you like me to do them separately or all as one?
Why don't we take...
We can have discussion if you want. Well, you can have discussion.
Yeah, why don't we do them separately?
Sounds good. I will start with the... I'll take them in order of the sheet. Which one's first?
Public relations.
Perfect. Public relations manager, might have been around here. So this would be a public relations manager report to the superintendent, which is myself. And the job would include, and we've talked a little bit about this with individuals, maybe about how several districts have this position in place already with the complexity of the world we're living in. But there's somebody that would help coordinate and highlight a lot of events that take place in our district, help monitor and support the social media presence that we have in the district, more of a counsel to the board and the district regarding public relations, newsworthy events, promoting the district, when there's crisis communication, a lot of these different facets, supporting some of the freedom of information requests that come through on a regular basis, advertising opportunities, a lot of that, those components that take place on a regular basis, making sure that our community and our constituents as a whole, not just parents, feel that communication is important. We want to make sure we get that information to them. So this is a position that we'd look to start soon. We have used in the past, we've used consultants for this work to help support when it comes to crisis. The recommendation to the board is that we have somebody that is more, I would say, vested in Hudsonville as a district, and not as an entity. So hopefully somebody that actually maybe lives here, has this as a background, maybe has a passion for this kind of work in and around our school.
A couple of things. Reports to us.
I did.
It's supposed to be assistant superintendent.
It is fixed on the. It's fixed online. It's not fixed on here. It does report to the superintendent, and it's not the assistant superintendent. It reports to the superintendent.
Okay. Reports to the superintendent. Okay. And
Sorry,
then, just a note. Just a brief note. The position title of public relations manager and the summary communications and marketing director. So
we will change.
Just make sure the right lines. Other questions, we'll take action on this separately. So other questions on this particular position? You've seen it, had a chance to review it. Anything from the board?
Just in terms of the websites and maintaining calendars and public information,
yeah.
I'm envisioning this helping us with improving transparency to the community, improving transparency of dates, events, supporting the buildings with communications, and making sure that we get robust processes and things like that.
Yeah, as an example, one of our building calendars did not have the updated agenda for the October 22nd date. That would help monitor that on a regular basis. Keep that in mind.
We'll move out of order. I should take a motion in a second. Can I have a motion, please, on this position? Motion by Chair Tuttle. Support from Barb. Now, questions, comments, clarifications on this?
Don't answer your question again.
I'm good on that one, but I think the intent and the purpose is to help increase transparency and broad communication.
Correct.
Other questions or comments on the position? Okay, we have a motion on the table. All in favor of the motion, please say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Opposed, no. Motion carried. Next, we move on to the federal program, state federal program coordinator.
Sure. So we, as you can imagine, COVID has been very challenging for everybody, including, I will say, our business department as well as our curriculum department, with federal dollars that are coming in. And there's still a lot of dispute regarding the equity payments with COVID, with ESSER 3. That additional $1,000 per student that we were guaranteed is not so much of a guarantee anymore. So we're finding that out maybe a little bit late in the game. We'll see how that plays out. But there are grants on a regular basis and all this accounting that has to take place with our curriculum department as well as our business office. The intent behind this position would be, when I say temporary, I mean until this is all ironed out, and who knows as we move forward. Several districts have what they call grant writers. They pretty much fund themselves because of the opportunity to acquire dollars, state and federal dollars. So this position would fall heavily of working with grants, working with the curriculum office, a lot of work with the business office regarding the budgets and the accountability for the federal programs that we have, which includes the allowable cost of what you can and cannot spend this on, what is the time period, the reimbursements in a time, make sure reimbursements are done in a timely manner, and also make sure that all the reporting is done in a timely manner, which has, I can tell you that some districts have hired 3 or 4 of these people because it's a lot to manage in a short amount of time. We have ESSER 1 funds need to be spent by fall, ESSER 2 by the following fall, ESSER 3 by the following fall, and there's a lot of moving parts with these and stay up on top of all the documentation. So the recommendation is that to have a state federal program coordinator help coordinate this effort until we deem that this position is no longer needed, as we talked about COVID in our past tense versus.
I have a motion, second please, the board approve the state and federal program coordinator as in your packet and the breakdown. By Emerson, support from Steve Baldwin. Questions, comments on the board?
This is full-time. This would be full-time. We don't. I think that's the challenge is, is there an ESSER 4? Is what happens with the accountability? I think we will have to evaluate it on a regular basis to make sure we write and keep in mind, this is a job description. This is not a job posting. So a job description to that point is really put in place so the expectations behind the work is there. The posting could be 40-hour-a-week position, full-time, could be salary, could be hourly. We have to work out some of those details, but we can't move forward with any of that until we have a job description. So it's a good question. I'm hoping I can tell you exactly when COVID's done, but I don't think.
I do appreciate your comment that, a metric for a position like this is you pay for yourself, and you can make an argument that you pay for yourself 2x, for a position like this. So I'm glad we have that in mind. Other questions, comments?
That to me, it would almost seem worthwhile to document maybe some of the extra grants that we pick up along the way. Because we've always had that argument that a person like this would more than pay for themselves and relieve other staff members.
And we don't even know what grants we've missed because we haven't had time to research and go through it.
Just confirming the reporting on this one is Assistant Superintendent of Instruction and Curriculum.
Other questions? Sorry.
Nope.
And I think, as we all know, in the past couple of years, the central office has gone above and beyond. We're going to need burnout. So I really appreciate the fact that you guys have proactively taken on the thought of adding some of these support systems that in the end are only going to benefit us.
I know with the grant, there's just a ton of paperwork. I mean, in the HR committee, when we talked about this, we have a full-time grant coordinator for significantly less funding than what Hudsonville Public Schools receive. So this position, I think, is long overdue. I don't know how you've made it this long without one. To be honest.
Other questions, comments, clarification? Okay, we have a motion on the table. All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Okay, one last one.
Yeah, so we have a COVID-19 pandemic response coordinator. We tried so hard not to add this position, but it's getting more and more complex. The added component, quite frankly, we are not sure the direction that'll happen with MyOSHA when it comes into the requirement for our staff members either to be vaccinated or tested once a week. We do have some encouraging news that by the time we get the information from MyOSHA, from OSHA to MyOSHA, there's a 30-day window before those directives are passed on to the locals. And then after that, it's probably about 55 days before that goes into effect. So we have time. If that even, and I'm not going to get into the legal arguments behind it. That's not my background. But I will tell you, at least, it doesn't look like this is going to take place. At one point, there was speculation it was going to take place today. It was going to be the first day. We panicked, thinking that was going to happen because there's a lot of moving parts. We have 1,300 employees in the district, and we are not in a position to, in my personal opinion, to require vaccinations of people that do not feel that it's in their family or their personal interest. So we have to try to navigate this and work with our staff through those measures. But this is one position based on the reporting mechanisms, based on the quarantining, whether it be voluntary or involuntary, whether it be required, voluntary or required, and whether it the notification of students, parents. It has been a lot. The reporting mechanisms. I meet with the health department twice a week. I asked our current coordinator, which is Ann Armstrong, to join as often as possible. She doesn't have time. She's busy dealing all weekend with situations behind COVID. So this would be somebody to be a liaison between our district and Ottawa County Health Department to help coordinate testing if required for COVID-19. And that includes maintaining records, reporting information, working with the health department when requested or needed, and then communicate daily positive cases throughout the district, which we do on a regular basis, but to give more of that time and energy into that role. Again, this has a shorter lifespan, I think, than the grant position, because this will probably have an end when we see and we think there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but we think the light will get brighter. It's not a train coming in, it's a brighter light, right? So we feel that at least this position may be, it could be a 6-month position, it could be a year, but I don't anticipate, well, I just hope it's not. And it's the same issue, job description, so that we can go back if something happens. This is an interesting position, right? So you could be more susceptible to illness if you're testing people. We have rapid testing at our office. So right now there are 3 people in our district that are approved for rapid testing. That is Ashley, which is Ann's assistant, and myself. So you can imagine on some days we'll have 20 people that'll come in to get rapid tested because they're a staff member, they're concerned, they were exposed, they're not feeling good, we want to make sure they feel safe. This is another position that will help navigate that and help our staff as we move forward. So that is our recommendation.
I have a motion and a second to approve the COVID-19 pandemic response coordinator position. Motion by Barb Cooper, support from Chad Tuttle. Questions or comments? Again, I think again, I like putting the position in place that you mentioned with the previous one that takes this activity, this day-to-day kind of tactical activity off the plates of our assistant superintendents, yourself, and so forth. I think it's a better use of time and money that allows us to bigger important. Not that cook is important, but we have a lot of other things. Other questions or comments? Okay, all in favor of the motion, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Okay, that's our action item for this evening. We have 2 items to cover in closed session. So the board will be taking a vote to go into closed session and then assuming that passes, enter closed session. We have 2 items. Those of you who are in presence tonight, you're welcome to stay. 30 to 45 minutes would be my best guess. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. Depends on how the conversation on this legal matter and labor negotiations goes. But again, you're welcome to stay.
That said less. That's all I heard.
Oh, that's saying less. So okay, so maybe 20 to 30 minutes. So okay, with that, can I have a motion, please, to enter closed session? Motion by Dawn. Support. Support from Chad. Okay, I'm gonna do the round table.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, we are in closed session, and we are, okay, we're going to move down the hall, and then we will come back out of closed session, and we'll sit down for that. So low. Sorry.
How much is pandemic response?
All right, we're finished with closed session. Can I have I'm sorry, before we go to adjourn, board going to. Anything you want to cover? Touch on?
I'd like to ask that you schedule a work session with an attorney to inform us on the Open Meetings Act. I'm a bit obscure about it myself. It would be helpful to know that we're doing what we need to do to comply with the Open Meetings Act. So I'll leave that to you, Ken. Okay.
This to the MASB, something that the public recently, that they have regularly scheduled classes and things like that too, so maybe we may want to consider as a board that we can work within that time.
I will take the action to look into that.
Thanks, Ken.
And figure out a way forward on virtual or in person or whatever. So I'm assuming you'll be flexible in that.
I'm so
virtual.
I'm like a reading but I'm good.
I'm good.
All right, thanks everybody for sticking it out tonight. Thanks for all the work from our curriculum, our team down there. With that, can I have a motion and second, please, to adjourn? So motion by Steve.
I'll support that.
Support by Davis. All in favor of adjournment, please say yes.
Yes.
adjourned. Thank you, everyone.